see so many people around here having a hissy fit about what they think their kids are or what they are going to learn in their history class about racism. And they'll say things like, oh, they're just trying to make our kids feel bad for being white, or they're trying to make our kids feel like they're born racist. And then they'll go on to explain about what we learned in school about racism and Jim Crow and slavery and all these racial topics was all true. We weren't taught anything wrong. They taught us about all that stuff. They should just keep teaching our kids the same way they taught us. There's no need to bring anything else into it. But here's the problem. Here's what we were taught. We were taught that slavery happened. Slavery was wrong. We were taught that segregation happened. Segregation was wrong. We were taught about how poorly people of color were treated. But we were taught it in a very impersonal way. And what I mean by that is in history class, whether it was in elementary school or high school, college, whatever the case may be, when I was in history class being taught about World War II, I could raise my hand and go, hey, my grandpa was in the Navy. He was in Japan. He watched the surrender of the Japanese. And my other grandpa was in the Army in Europe, and he went through Normandy and all the different battles all the way to the end. And my grandpa's brothers, they were in the service too. And all my grandma's brothers, they were in the service. And I could look at this subject in history very personally, with pride. My family was involved in it. They were a part of history. Learn about World War II, that was about us. We did that. We won the Second World War. But when you're in history class learning about slavery, Jim Crow and segregation, civil rights movement, we didn't do that. Somebody did that. Despite the fact that we are sitting in a classroom in a town that was completely segregated, where Jim Crow laws were enforced, where all the things that we're talking about, how horrible they were, happened. And they had happened 40-something, 30-something, and as little as 20-something years before we were talking about it in this class. Yet there are no hands that go up in that class that go, yeah, my grandpa's or my grandpa's brothers or sisters or grandma's brothers or sisters or their parents or any of our ancestors took part in that and supported it wholeheartedly, 100%. Absolutely not. We lived in a town that had an elementary school for black kids, but no high school. If they wanted to go to high school, the Board of Education didn't provide that opportunity for them. They had to go to another town and go to high school. They couldn't attend white churches. They all lived in the same rundown part of town. Nobody ever told us in those classes about the local newspaper's editorial opinion of Martin Luther King Jr.'s death. And that opinion was that he was a race-baiting agitator who brought about his own death because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. We were learning about these things 20 years later. Yet no one ever told us. The majority of adults you're surrounded by now, they thought this was all okay.
Black people, after they've been murdered, when they did absolutely nothing wrong, you're pushing us to the limit. And what do I mean by that? You're asking us to talk about history, the history of the South. This is in Georgia. What happened in Georgia? There were savages in Georgia. It was the ancestors of the white right-wingers. They were absolute savages. They murdered people, they lynched people, they raped people, they enslaved people. They took babies from their mothers and sold them as property. You want to talk about savages? Your ancestors were the biggest savages the world has ever seen. So don't you dare call a black man a savage after you murdered him. Don't you dare do that. I'm so sick of African Americans being called violent when the world's worst violence was done to them, not by them, to them, not by them. For God's sake, you want to do racist stereotypes? If it fit anywhere, and it doesn't, but if it fit anywhere, it would certainly fit white right-wingers in the South, who has hundreds of years of history of being savages. Savages. They snatched babies and they sold them as property and they raped their mothers. Savages. That's what they were. You want to talk about stereotypes? Screw all of you who still defend that Confederacy, that monstrosity. Anyone who defends that is a barbaric savage.